Two police officers in New York assassinated in cold blood. We are going to talk about racism today from an angle that very few dare to say.
Those who forsake the law praise the wicked. Those who uphold the law resist them. Welcome to the Voice of Resistance. Here's your host, Randall Terry.
Hello, friend. Our studio is under construction, as you know, and you might hear some construction noises going on in the background. We shot all of our Christmas week shows ahead of time so that we could spend time with our family. But as you know, over the weekend, two police officers were murdered in cold blood in New York. And I thought that it was my duty to at least devote one segment to those killings and to discuss racism in a way that is, I pray, true and just. And then we'll continue on in the show with some stuff about the Obamas and about parenting. But let me jump right in. The Bible says to judge with just judgment. To judge with just judgment. We are commanded to look at what is going on in the culture today and to judge, to say, well, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is evil, okay? If we had been alive in the 1850s, it would have been our duty to condemn slavery. To judge with just judgment at that time in human history would have meant that we said publicly that our Constitution is a betrayal of African Americans. Abraham Lincoln said that the Civil War was the judgment of God. He had just judgment in his view of and understanding of the Civil War. David Walker, the young black man from Boston, wrote his book, Appeal, David Walker's Appeal, in which in the 1830s, he prophesied the coming of the Civil War. He prophesied that it would come because of the cry going up from African Americans who had been kidnapped, who were enslaved, and this was a grotesque sin against God. It was a sin against God. I want everyone to understand that slavery was an abominable crime, and it was based on racism, it was treacherous, it was evil. But I want to say clearly, what is happening right now with these various group of African American agitators who are racists, and I'll explain that in a minute, that what's going on now is not the result of slavery. This is not about that. This is about a culture, a subculture in America that has betrayed certain commandments of God and is now out of control. And it can happen to white Americans, but I want to focus for a minute on African Americans. The African American community was horribly abused in slavery, clearly, and then you had the Jim Crow laws. Then you had the Ku Klux Klan. Then you had segregation. This was all sins against God. But slowly, over time, those sins were rectified. And there was tremendous movement towards righteousness and justice and people getting along regardless of the color of their skin in many of our cities and many of our communities. But along came Lyndon Baines Johnson, who wanted these people to become, the African American community, to become a voting bloc for the Democratic Party. And he said so, right? You can do your own history research. So they based this absorption of African American voters into the Democratic Party on sins against God and against the laws of God. For example, 6 days shall you labor and the seventh day rest. That's a commandment of God. But they said, no, you don't have to work. We'll create a welfare state. We'll take care of your food with food stamps. We'll take care of housing. So they made them wards of the state. It was almost like enslaving them all over again. How about the commandment, honor your father and mother? Jesus said that means that you take care of your parents in old age. But Lyndon Baines Johnson said, no, you don't have to worry about family being tight and cohesive. We're going to take care of them. Or thou shalt not commit adultery. All of the sexual sins that are delineated in the scriptures start with that commandment. And what the federal government did was they said, hey, you can have as many children as you want out of wedlock. You can have sex with whoever you want, as many different dads as you want, and we're going to give you money. We're going to give you more money the more children you have. And then you have thou shalt not covet. So then suddenly there was this greed, this covetousness. One of my uncles years ago said something that I thought was so shocking. He said, the welfare state is a deal that we cut with the inner cities that says, and he said to African American, he said, we give you money and in exchange for that, you don't burn down our cities. But friend, it's all based upon sins against God. It's about theft, taking other people's money, redistributing the wealth. And it has created, all of that has created this subculture of young black men who many of them are in fatherless homes, in generational welfare, etc., etc. It's not because they're black, it's the culture and what the government has done and what parents have done and what families have done that have produced this young cadre of black men criminals. It can happen to white people and Hispanic people too, but it's not racist for us to say this about the African American community.
You have two choices. I mean, you can try to raise your children by design, or you will raise them by default. There are no perfect parents. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. If we have a plan, we've got a better chance of getting it right in the long run.
There is something deep within the heart of every human being that longs for parental acceptance and approval. When does a boy become a man?
Get a group of guys around and ask them that question.
I don't think there's a certain age. Some men stay boys their whole life.
I would say, 16, 18 years old.
Wow, that's a good question.
When they get bar mitzvah.
Well, I think when he has a child. So I just became at 56, 56 years old.
Without the power of the Holy Spirit changing us and giving us power over our sin, we can't hope to be the dads that our kids need us to be.
As we approach the end of this year and begin the next one, it's a time when people reflect. It's a time when people make inventory, make New Year's resolutions. And I want to speak to moms and dads, grandmas and grandpas, adults. From some people, you learn what to do. And from some people, you learn what not to do. And from some people, you learn both. And it is incumbent upon us as parents to, number one, learn from our own mistakes, including the mistakes of our youth, and then to do what we can to protect our children from those mistakes and to not succumb to peer pressure. And life has so many different phases. I mean, you've got childhood, just true childhood. And that's when, we as parents and as grandparents and just as adults, we should be so protective of children right now. So protective. I'm 55. When I was a boy, to see or to have a dirty magazine around, it happened. It was unusual, but it happened in the neighborhood where I was. And it would, almost inevitably would come to light and parents would find out. And then, decisions are made who you hang out with, who you don't hang out with, who your parents allow you to go see, who they don't allow you to go see. But we're so far past that now. We are so far past that. I was at a church function recently, and one of the parents said to me, "You need to watch out for this young boy." The kid's 10. He's 11 years old. And I said, "Excuse me?" And they said, "Well, he's got his own iPhone, and he has unlimited access to the internet." And this is a 10-year-old boy. And then the parent said, "We don't allow him at our house anymore because of things that he has shown to our son." I mean, I give you this one illustration because the speed of data and communications and unholy things and the volume of it is so different than it was a half a century ago, 30, 40 years ago. It's just a completely different world. And at the same time, when there's all of this corruption that we're being inundated with, we're also being told to let our kids experiment, that that they're having so-called sex education for children younger and younger, even in elementary school. One of the communities that we lived in recently, one third of the children polled, 1/3 of the kids in high school said that they were doing drugs on a regular basis. 1/3. In the elementary school, it was an astronomical amount of those kids that were involved in sexual acts, okay? As I'm talking elementary school. And the Bible says that evil relationships corrupt good morals. And some of us can think back, perhaps you can think back to things that happened to you or that you did as a child, as a minor, that had a very unwholesome impact on your soul, okay? And perhaps an impact that stays with you for the rest of your life. It's our job to try our best to protect our children from that. And the people that want to say to us, oh, let kids be kids. No, I mean, what does that even mean? What does that even mean? I mean, we've got a mission. For each of us, our ultimate mission is to know God and to love Him and to serve Him forever and to be with Him in eternity, in heaven, and to not go to hell. That is our ultimate mission for each of us individually. But for those of us who have our own children and grandchildren, it is our mission for them as well. And there's a lot of us that are parents and grandparents who have made decisions that impact children and grandchildren negatively. And we wish we hadn't done those things, whatever it is, who we let them hang out with, where we put them in school, where we didn't put them in school. And it's not too late to learn from our mistakes regarding things that impact our children and our grandchildren. And it's our duty to ignore and to resist the voices that say to us that our children should be allowed to do whatever they want. And the kids will be kids. Here's an iPhone, here's an iPad. Here's the remote to the TV. Go ahead, watch whatever you want. It's our job to say no. No. And to mold them in such a way that they have a better chance of fulfilling their ultimate goal, which is to get to heaven and to not go to hell. I've got to take a break. I'll be right back. Continue with this. Do you want to get America out of the hands of wicked and unjust men and women who are destroying the republic before our eyes, and put leadership back into the hands of righteous men and women so that we don't die as a nation? Well, you're talking about social revolution, and there are rules in social revolution. We can look at the victorious social revolutions of the past, such as the end of slavery, the end of child labor, women's voting rights, the end of segregation, and so much more, and learn from their victories. Look at their actions, their images, their rhetoric, their sacrifices, and their final fruit. We will send you this series that originally cost $129, 7 books for students, 1 teacher's guide, if you'll give a gift of any size and just pay for shipping and handling. Take advantage of it today. If you have been following Michelle Obama's school lunch agenda and seen some of the images of these meals, like, look at this. This is what some schools are offering kids. And the kids are complaining, going on a whole rabbit trail about whether or not the government should be feeding children. That's a whole nother issue. I think the answer is no. The government is not our daddy. The government is not our provider. All right. But that all aside, you're dealing with a woman and a man in the Obamas that have daughters. And they said, and Obama said, and one would think Michelle agrees, that they would never want their daughters punished with a baby. So in other words, you've got Michelle Obama saying, hey, we need to feed kids more broccoli and less sugar, which is true. But she's perfectly content to by implication, her and her husband, to say that their daughters can be promiscuous and should be able to abort their child, kill the Obama's grandchild. Now, I'm saying this to jar you. Obama literally talked about, publicly discussed, killing his own grandchild. That is so sick. That is so sick. All that goes with that, all that leads up to that, it's sick, it's demented. But they want children to not have soda pop machines in the schools and to not have simple sugar, but to eat broccoli and healthy food. Does that seem a little bit warped to you? So, as we close out this year, as we begin the next year, I want you to think about how God made us, how God wired us, and our inability to take in all of this data. We're not made to do it. And ponder this, please. We have not even begun to assess the damage to the human soul and heart, the damage to relationships, the damage to marriages, the damage to children, their ability to read and to reason and to think. We haven't even begun to assess the damage that our godless devices are doing. One of my staff and I were talking recently about kids who can use an iPad but cannot build with Legos. They don't have the motor skills and the imagination to take a bunch of loose Legos and to create something. Think of how that will impact them later in life. They know how to swipe on an iPad, but they don't know how to look at a problem and solve it. So, Randall, what are you saying? I'm saying that it's a different world than when we were young, and that we have to be perhaps hyper vigilant. Not just vigilant for our children and our grandchildren, but hyper vigilant. Recognizing that the forces of evil that could corrupt a soul 50 or 100 years ago, those forces of evil have pathways now into humanity, into our homes, into our children's minds and hearts and behaviors. The forces of evil have pathways that we have not even begun to plumb, and we need to protect our kids from. So, as we close out this year, as we begin the new one, I encourage you, think about your kids, think about your grandkids, and what changes you could or should make for their good. And I got to take a break, but I'll tell you when I come back that it's hard. It is not easy. I have been a leader in the pro-life movement for 30 years. And sadly, we have not prevailed in our goal to make it a criminal act to kill an unborn baby. There's reasons why we have failed. I wrote this book, A Humble Plea, to Catholic bishops, to evangelical clergy, and to lay people, explaining where we went wrong and what we have to do to prevail. We've made this available as a PDF online for free. I encourage you to go and download your own copy. We have put together what we call an online university for you. Now that's a highfalutin way of saying that we have a pretty significant library of material, books, tapes, videos that are there for you for free. Why are we doing this? Because America is desperate for new leaders, and because this material could help you to become the leader that you and God want you to be. Check it out and enjoy it. It is harder. It takes more time. It takes more discipline. It takes more forethought. It is harder to raise children and grandchildren for righteousness and justice and to focus on them than it is to just say, here's a DVD, here's a computer, here's a movie, here's the iPad. It's harder. And each of us has a sin nature, all right? Whatever denominational background you're from, whatever theological framework you address it, whether you want to call it original sin or whether you want to call it a sin nature, I don't care, temptation, whatever it is, each of us must wrestle with the fact that we want to live for ourselves and not die to ourselves. Jesus said, pick up your cross, follow me, die to yourself. And those words have a lot more meaning when you have children. They have a lot more meaning when you want to stand up for what is true and right and just in the public square. They have a lot more meaning when you want to raise your children properly. So it's the cross that you bear with raising your kids right, and the time that it takes and the effort and what that means you have to give up. But it also is a cross to bear when you feel you have to defend those decisions with family. So you've got it worse on both fronts. My wife and I, we homeschool our kids. Many of you homeschool. Some of you have your kids in private school. The decisions that we make with our children for their good take an enormous amount of time and effort and take resources. And it involves the loss of liberty for us. And then sometimes we have to answer to people at church or people that are extended family members who look at us like, you're crazy or whatever. And it's almost funny because people truly enjoy seeing well-behaved children. Think of how fun it is for you when you see well-behaved kids who play well together, they're not unkind to other children, they're respectful to adults, they obey their parents. Think of how fun that is. But then there are some people who say, well, why are you so strict? Why are you doing this? Why don't you let them do that? Why don't your kids have computers? And it's almost like they can't get it. That this is of a piece. If you want well-behaved children, if you want obedient and respectful and kind children, then there are certain things that you have to do with them and not allow them to do. And all of it is harder. I'm letting you know right now, as a dad, that there have been times when I just think, man, for the days when my wife and I could do whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted. But that very voice in my head is just the voice of selfishness.